Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this GCSE English live group tutorial. Sorry, we're just a couple of minutes late launching this morning. Today's session is on Paper 1, Question 3 for your GCSE English Language, and this is part 2. So we had part 1 earlier in the week, and I can see lots of you joined us for that. And this is part 2 of our tutor Vicky's sessions on Paper 1, Question 3. So thanks for joining us this morning. As usual, the tutorial will be 1 hour long, so we'll be finishing at 12 midday, and you can ask any questions to either Vicky or myself through the chat or Q&A function. I'm Tilly, I work at My Tutor, so any questions you have about the My Tutor online school, just let me know and I can answer that. And any questions you have for Vicky about the content she's going through, then just pop that in the chat as well. She'll be looking as she goes along, but we'll also have some time for any questions at the end as well. So Vicky is our tutor today. Lots of you know her already. She's one of our top tutors, studied English language and linguistics, and is a trained English teacher and has been with My Tutor for a really long time. So it should be a great session today. And if we're all ready, then let's kick off.
Lovely, thank you, Tilly. Right, so we're going to continue on with what we started looking at yesterday, and we're going to do a bit more detail in terms of the text that we're going to be looking at. So today I've chosen to look at the Catcher in the Rye. So we're going to be looking at an extract. I think we're looking at 3 chunky paragraphs for that, so a little longer than the text that we looked at yesterday and what we rushed through a little bit. So, same as always then, paper 1, question 3, always looks the same, apart from where you are told the text comes from in terms of the text as a whole, whether it's a short story, whether it's a book. They tend to be in exams short stories. However, I'm looking over a range of books with you guys. So they're either novels or novellas, just because it gives a little bit of variety. So the one thing that I have missed out here is you being told where it comes from in the text, because I want you to have a look at the text and tell me where you think it comes from. So that's why I've left it out of the brief there. So I said this yesterday. So in terms of structural features, what we need to know is where, how and why they are used and why they are effective. So, quick little starter then. So this is my little rubbish acronym that I use. So, how many can you remember for structural features, please? I'll give you a couple of minutes just to fire some at me. Yeah, start setting, foreshadowing it, which isn't there, transition, flashback or forwards, zoom in and out, omniscient narrator, yeah, you could have unreliable narrator, that's a nice one as well. Perspective, lovely. Cyclical. Over the shoulder, yeah, perspective, yep. Ending, focus. Yeah, good. I think we've pretty much got all of them. We've definitely got all of them for the stop fez. And then the any others that you can think of. So you came up with cyclical. I'm not sure which other ones you've come up with. I don't think. Let's see, cyclicals there. Yeah, so the other ones were pace, tone, and repetition. So another little activity for you then before we get cracking. So you've got your definitions for each of the techniques on the right with a letter next to them, and then you've got the techniques on the left side with the number next to them. Can you match them up for me, please? Off you go, another couple of minutes. 1, C, yeah, that's a nice straightforward one. Start the beginning of the text. Yep. 2, setting. G, where a story takes place. Yep. 10, cyclical. H, starting and finishing a story in the same place. 5, and I assume that's an I. Nope. 1 and C. 5 and A, yeah, so perspective. The view a story is being told from. 3, J, so transitions, moving in between ideas and characters. Yep, lovely. 4, omniscient narrator, the view a story is being told from. Yeah, so omniscient narrator is a type of perspective, I suppose, but that isn't the answer that I'm looking for omniscient narrator. Omniscient narrator E. First person speaker who's all-knowing, fantastic. Repetition B, yep, returning to the same word, phrase or idea on several occasions. 12, pace. K, how quickly or slowly the story moves along, lovely. Right. 8, zoom in and out with F, looking at something in detail and then looking at the broad picture, yeah, lovely. 11D, the mood of the text. Yep, I think we've done all of them. I think you've got them all. I'm not sure whether we did flashback or flash forward, which is moving in between different times. I'm not sure we did that one, but yep, cracking, good work. Right, so let's move on to our text for today then. So we're going to be looking at The Catcher in the Rye, as I said. So as always, you get a little bit of context, which is always important to read, which will keep banging you over the heads with, I'm afraid. So the extract that we're going to look at is taken from Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, written in 1951, and the story follows Holden Caulfield, a 16-year-old boy living in New York. So you don't get told too much, so there isn't a huge amount to take away from there. So let's have a look at the extract. So where are we? Here we are. It is over the page. Right. Trying to hide where it's from. Right, so here we go then. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it. If you want to know the truth, in the first place, the stuff bores me, and in the second place, my parents would have about 2 hemorrhages apiece if I told them anything pretty personal about them. They're quite touchy about anything like that, especially my father. They're nice and all, I'm not saying that, but they're also touchy as hell. Besides, I'm not going to tell you my whole goddamn autobiography or anything. I'll just tell you about this madman stuff that happened to me around last Christmas, just before I got pretty run down and had to come out here and take it easy. I mean, that's all I told DB about, and he's my brother-in-law. He's in Hollywood. That isn't too far from this crummy place, and he comes over and visits me practically every weekend. He's going to drive me home when I go home next month, maybe. He just got a Jaguar. One of those little English jobs that can do around 200 miles an hour. It cost him damn near $4,000. He's got a lot of dough now. He didn't used to. He used to be just a regular writer when he was home. He wrote this terrific book of short stories, The Secret Goldfish, in case you never heard of him. The best one in it was The Secret Goldfish. It was about this little kid that wouldn't let anybody look at his goldfish because he bought it with his own money. It killed me. Now he's about in Hollywood, DB, being a prostitute. If there's one thing I hate, it's movies. Don't even mention them to me. Where I want to start telling is the day I left Pensy Prep. Pensy Prep is a school that's in Hagerstown, Pennsylvania. You probably heard of it. You've probably seen the ads anyway. They advertise in about 1,000 magazines, always showing some hotshot guy on a horse jumping over a fence, like as if all you ever did at Pensy was play polo all the time. I never even once saw a horse anywhere near the place, and underneath the guy on the horse's picture it always says, "Since 1888 we have been moulding boys into splendid clear-thinking young men, strictly for the birds." They don't do any damn more modelling at Pensy than they do at any other school, and I didn't know anybody there that was splendid and clear-thinking and all. Maybe 2 guys, if that many, and they probably came to Pensy that way. Anyway, it was the Saturday of the football game with Saxon Hall. The game with Saxon Hall was supposed to be a very big deal around Pensy. It was the last game of the year, and you were supposed to commit suicide or something if Old Pensy didn't win. I remember around 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was standing way the hell up on the top of Thompson Hill, right next to this crazy cannon that was in the Revolutionary Wall and all. You can see the whole field from there, and you could see the 2 teams bashing each other all over the place. You couldn't see the grandstand too hot, but you could hear them all yelling deep and terrific on the Pensy side, because practically the whole school except me was there, and Scrawny and Faggy on the Saxon Hall side, because the visiting team hardly ever brought many people with them. So, right. First impressions then. What do you think of this text? Can you first tell me what you think of it, and second, can you take a guess as to where this appears in the book? So does it start, middle, end, somewhere in between one of those? What do you think of our narrator Holden? What is hemorrhages? Yeah, there's quite a few words in here which are a little tricky. So hemorrhage is where it's a medical term where if you hemorrhage, you're likely to bleed excessively and it can lead to death. So that's what that means. Yeah, it's from the start of the book, absolutely. There's a lot of slang, it's very informal and it's quite rude and sarcastic, isn't it? Yeah, he's I really like the person who said the protagonist has a foul palette of language. Absolutely right. It's very strong, isn't it? It's very striking. And I'll fully admit to you that I have not read the rest of this book purely because I'm so put off by it and not liking the narrator very much. It's one of those things that I've always sort of put off because I haven't heard a great deal of good about the narrator, but perhaps that's the point. So it's the excuse I've been using for not reading it. So absolutely, it begins at the beginning of the novel. Why do we think it's from the beginning of the novel? It's quite a small novel actually, so it would be a relatively quick read. Just grab it for you. So about just over 200 pages, so it is quite a small read as books go. So it's just a little bit bigger than a novella. But again, you've seen the language is quite easy to understand generally because it's quite colloquial. So I don't think it would take you too much time to get through it as perhaps a novella from the 19th century like Jekyll and Hyde, where it's much more dense. Informal, sarcastic, yeah, it's very sarcastic. Yeah, some things are being introduced, absolutely, and the narrator's trying to educate us. Yeah, and we know, we've been told that he's a 16-year-old anyway, but we probably could have worked out his age based on the colloquial language he is using. Yeah, I will get to where he describes his brother as a prostitute, which I think is very odd because it's not what you think it would mean. Right. So let's go through then and do some feature spotting. So what I think is always really useful to do is, as we go through for each paragraph, just label what the focus is, because that's sort of effectively ticking off 2 bullet points in terms of the sort of little note making and annotations you do in terms of your planning. So, where's best? I think we will put that over on that side so I can write to the right of it. Right, so let's have a little read through. So if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born. So already we found out that it is first person perspective. So we've got where I was, and then we've got born here. So that's one thing that we already know. That's effectively one feature ticked off very quickly. So, oh, that should say and what my lousy childhood was like, and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. So already we're sort of learning that there's this first person perspective is quite defensive, and to the person who came up with unreliable narrator last time, I think we could possibly say that he might be unreliable as a narrator because he's saying there's only certain things I want to tell you. So we might get a very biased picture, which I think is probably what we do get from what we've got in front of us. Right, so in the first place, that stuff bores me, and in the second place, my parents would have about 2 hemorrhages apiece if I told them anything pretty personal about them. So he's giving excuses for his parents. We're getting a little bit of characterization here. So we're learning about, or at least the opinion that he has of his parents. So what do you think we could deduce from the characterization of that phrase about his parents? What do you think we could say about them, or at least what he thinks of them? Yeah, quite strict parenting, absolutely. So yeah, his parents seem to be quite private people and potentially strict, so we could deduce that about them, or at least that's how he feels. Again, we could perhaps imply that he's 16 years old, and most 16-year-olds could potentially think that their parents are strict, because some parents do tend to stop you from doing some things. Right, so they're quite touchy about anything like that, especially my father, so just developing this characterization a little bit. They're nice and all, so sort of backtracking a little bit, he said, oh, that, you know, they go absolutely mental, and then he says, oh, actually they're quite nice. So there's definitely some love, and he doesn't completely dislike them, because that's sort of the sort of foot we start off on. So we're getting a slightly broader picture now. So I'm not saying that, but they're also touchy as hell. So besides, I'm not going to tell you my whole goddamn autobiography or anything. So again, he's very defensive, could be quite, he's setting up to be an unreliable narrator, definitely. I'll just tell you all about this madman stuff that happened to me around last Christmas, just before I got pretty run down and had to come out here and take it easy. I mean, that's all I told DB about, and he's my brother and all. He's in Hollywood. That isn't too far from this crummy place, so there's starting to be a little bit of a talk of setting, but it isn't very developed, so I probably wouldn't talk about it. But he's definitely characterizing his brother for us here a little bit. So that isn't too far from this crummy place, and he comes to visit me practically every weekend. He's going to drive me home when I go home next month, maybe. So he seems to be quite a nice, sort of what you would expect a big brother to be like so far. He's got a Jaguar, so one of those little English jobs that you can do around 200 miles an hour. It cost him damn near $4,000. So again, we've got very colloquial language going on here, but we are looking at structure, not language. So we're learning that he's got, you know, a nice little bit of money to be able to fork out for Jaguar. Remember that this is written in 1951, so £4,000 would have been a lot more than our £4,000 today. He's got a lot of dough now. He didn't used to. He used to be a regular writer when he was home. He wrote the terrific book of short stories, so we're learning more about him. So really, so far, we've learnt more about his brother than any of the characters, including himself. At least concrete stuff. We're starting to formulate opinions about him, but we haven't got anything concrete really about who he is. Okay, so The Secret Goldfish, in case you haven't heard of it, the best one in it was The Secret Goldfish. It was about a little kid who wouldn't let anybody look at his goldfish because he'd bought it with his own money. It killed me. Now he's in Hollywood DB being a prostitute. If there's one thing I hate, it's the movies. Don't even mention them to me. Right, so what he's getting at there, when he calls his brother a prostitute, which seems very odd, is that he has probably sold out in terms of his works, and he's gone to Hollywood and he started making play scripts of his books, of his works, and he's making a lot of money from it. So that's probably what he means by calling him a prostitute, which is an incredibly negative thing, I would say, to call your brother. Right, so we've got characterization of DB. Interesting that we've just got his initials. Now, I would guess that this is a way of being defensive and not giving us his full name, but perhaps he's just referred to by his initials. So we've definitely got loads of characterization in terms of other characters. We've got first person perspective, and the other thing that I think we could comment on is the tone. So a lot of us have said that it's quite sort of sarcastic, matter of fact. So those we could talk about. Let me just double check questions before I move on to the next paragraph. It's interesting that you've read this in year 7. I would say that's quite young to read Catcher in the Rye. I'm not sure whether it's on the A-level syllabus, actually. Anyway, let's move on. So, as a set text, that is. Okay, so where I want to start telling is the day I left Pensy Prep. So now we're actually moving on. So our focus here, so always good to label focuses, which I forgot to do. So our focus here is his family mainly, isn't it? He doesn't really tell us much else. He doesn't really tell us much about him. He diverts it to his family. Right, so where I want to start telling the story is the day I left Pensy Prep. So now we're actually moving on to him. We're moving on to his schooling. So Pensy Prep is a school that's in Hagerstown, Pennsylvania. You probably heard of it. So I think that is I think that's quite arrogant, maybe, that you would assume that people have heard of it. So let's just underline that as our focus. So I think, yeah, this is very, very interesting. So you've probably seen the ads anyway. They advertise in about 4,000 magazines, always showing some hotshot guy on a horse jumping over a fence. Like as if all you ever did at Pensy was play polo all the time. I never even once saw a horse anywhere near the place. So again, he's starting to be quite negative and sort of saying first appearances can be quite deceptive and deceitful. And then where do we get to? So, like as if all you did at Pensy was playing polo all the time. I never even once saw a horse anywhere near the place. And underneath the guy on the horse's picture, it always said, since 1888 we've been moulding boys into splendid clear thinking young men, strictly for the birds. So he thinks that the reason for that is to get girls interested, whereas it's probably more likely to promote it in sort of a very well-rounded school that you would want to send your children to. So it's probably actually aimed at the parents. They don't do any down moulding at Pensy. than they do at any other school. And they didn't know anybody there that was a splendid, clear thinking at all. And all. Maybe 2 guys, if that many, and they probably came to Pensy that way. So our focus then, there isn't anything particularly interesting in terms of structural features there. So our focus then is moving on to his schooling. So again, sort of diverting further and talking about schooling rather than him. So it tells us a little bit about the background that he's from. So this is probably a very, very nice school and one that you would have to pay to attend. So it tells us a little bit of his social economic background. So there isn't anything that's particularly exciting there, so apart from the change in focus. So let's have a look at the last paragraph then. So anyway, it was the Saturday of the football game with Saxon Hall. The game with Saxon Hall was supposed to be a very big deal around Pensy. So now we're sort of starting to zoom in and talk about the school in a bit more detail. So let's just underline an example of that. So Saturday football game with Saxon Hall. There we go. Right. So it was the last game of the year and he was supposed to commit suicide or something if Old Pensy didn't win. So again, we've got quite, the tone is very much the same all the way throughout. It's quite sarcastic and hyperbolic. You know, they probably don't expect you to commit suicide if they don't win. So I remember around 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was standing way the hell up on top of the Thompson Hill, right next to the crazy cannon that was the Revolutionary War and all. You could see the whole field from there and you could see the 2 teams bashing each other all over the place. So now we're moving a little bit on to setting. So you could see the whole field. You couldn't see the grandstand too hot, but you could hear them all yelling deep and terrific on the Pensy side because practically the whole school except me was there. And the scrawny and faggy on the Saxon Hall side because the visiting team hardly ever brought many people with them. So our focus then mainly is the football game. So what actually goes on at the school. So let's just put that in the different colour that I've been colour coding it in. So focus is the football game. And again, we are learning stuff about the characterisation of this person because I think he comes across incredibly strongly in his views. And we're also learning that he's probably a bit of an outcast if he's the only one that's deciding to watch it from afar. He's not particularly interested in sort of what you would expect a stereotypical teenager to be interested in mainly. Yeah, I will go back over the stop fez again and I will do that towards the end of the lesson. Yeah, if you haven't read this is absolutely fine. We're not expecting you to have read it. So the text, all the texts that I pick out, I do not expect you to have read because we're doing language, not literature. So I'm not expecting you to come with knowledge of this text at all. So don't worry if you haven't read it before because you don't need to have. So, right, let's whiz back then. So this is basically what I've tried to put in terms of looking at each bullet point. So we could look at the focus at the beginning. So the focus on the narrator and his family is mainly to do with his family and diverging. Then changing focus, so we've only got 2 paragraphs really. So I think looking at focus in terms of paragraph by paragraph is probably the best way for you to do this in the exam because you don't have a lot of time. And this is only an 8 marker as well. So our second paragraph is all about his schooling, and then the third paragraph, which is about the football game against Saxon Hall. Any other structural features? So these are always really nice to roll in to either the change of focus or the focus at the beginning in terms of creating a more sophisticated and an intelligent paragraph in terms of your analysis. So first person perspective, tone, so we said negative attitudes, matter of fact, which the other one that I haven't said is no need to please the reader, so he doesn't feel like he needs to get you on side. He's quite happy to say what he wants to and isn't worried about upsetting anybody. So there's characterisation of the narrator, parents and brother. Parents and brother are much more overt. Characterisation of the narrator is much more covert because we learn more about his personalities through the attitudes and perspectives that he has rather than the information he actually tells us about himself. Repetition of sarcastic and egotistical language. So he's very first person centered. This is what I think. So this is sort of, it's almost opinion as fact. And then transitions from background information to school and then to an event at school. Right, so those are pretty much, it's not finite, but that's absolutely more than we need to go on in terms of actually creating an answer. So we need to effectively pick two paragraphs that we are going to look at. So what I thought might be helpful was just to show you how I annotate on a piece of paper first of all, which is very similar to what I've done today, but you can see I've done very little highlighting. I've only highlighted a few examples because you don't need lots and lots of examples, and I'm just making notes next to them in terms of what I could potentially write about. So in terms of features then, so I'm going to look at focus at the beginning, and I'm also going to try and link in some ideas of pace maybe, because I think it's quite an interesting in terms of pace, because it's trying to diverge what we would normally expect in terms of the information that he gives us about himself. I'm then thinking about looking at the change in focus. So, and then I'm going to try and link tone into there, maybe a little bit of tension. Definitely look at the perspective that this is from, because I think that's very important. So let's have a go at writing. Sorry, I always feel really rude when I have to drink, but my mouth gets very dry. Right, so let's see how we go. Don't want it in blue, I want it in black. Right, so at the beginning of the extract, so try and use as much terminology, as much language that is in the question itself, so you make it very clear that that is the question that you are answering. So, Salinga, so I am making sure that the examiner knows who I am talking about, and I know the author. So Salinga focuses our attention on the narrator and his family. So quite a basic point there. Then I'm going to embed my evidence. So embedding, remember, is where I just go straight into it and I don't write anything, for example, or this is shown in, this is shown by, something along those lines. What my lousy childhood was like. So that's the one that I've chosen there. Make sure that we put punctuation inside. So the narrator acknowledges, never spell acknowledges, but there we go. Right, acknowledges the information that the reader is likely to seek. So we initially think, oh right, well, first person perspective, and if we're going to get characterization, the most obvious one is the characterization and the background information of the narrator, and we don't really get that. So I'm going to say why and how he does it, but refuses to give these details. So the author, I'm now going to say why. So the author may choose, I'm being tentative as well, I'm saying may, I'm not saying he has chosen to do this and I know that this is why. So I'm making sure that I'm making it aware that it's a possible interpretation. It's not the only interpretation. So the author may choose, where did I get to do this in order to pace the text. So sort of slowing things up a bit. It's not going really, really fast at 100 miles an hour. We're learning loads and loads of stuff about him. So that's one possible analysis. Or, so now I'm going to give an alternative analysis to show that I'm really thinking about the different ways that we could formulate opinions on this. This is the one that I think is more likely why it's been done, or more likely to inform the reader of the personality and attitudes of the narrator. So he tends to be quite a negative, sarcastic person. So then I'm going to say the effect of this, so allowing the reader to conclude that the narrator is arrogant and egotistical. What I need to put in here, so allowing the reader to possibly, so need to be tentative, possibly conclude that the narrator is arrogant and egotistical. So I've ticked off two things there already. I've ticked off what the focus is at the beginning, and I've also ticked off any other structural features by talking about pace. Right, so now I'm going to have a go at my second paragraph. So instead of directly telling us about himself, the narrator focuses his attention on the characterization of his family. Thinking, is that telling me to spell it with a Z? Yeah. So characterization is fine, but my computer's telling me to use the American spelling. Of his family, comma, right. So now I'm going to embed again. So my parents would have about 2 hemorrhages. I thought I spelled that right as well. Hemorrhages is a horrible word to spell. If you're not sure how you're spelling something and it is written in front of you, make sure that you go back and look at it and don't spell it wrong if you are doing a direct quotation, because there isn't an excuse for it. A piece. Right, so this gives the reader insight into Holden's perspective. So now I'm actually using his name, showing that I've read the context of his parents, and suggesting that his parents are both uptight and have something to hide, creating tension and intrigue. So I've managed to include a load of structural features there. So I've talked briefly about characterization, I've mentioned perspective, and I've also mentioned tension there, but I haven't really gone into too much detail about it. So let's have a read. Instead of directly telling us about himself, the narrator focuses our attention, always good to read over, on the characterization of his family. My parents would have about 2 hemorrhages apiece. This gives the reader insight into Holden's perspective as his parents, suggesting that his parents are both uptight and have something to hide, creating tension and intrigue. However, as the extract moves on, we do not we are not told about why Holden's parents would be upset about personal details being revealed. This makes the reader question and postulate the reasons as to why this might be. So I'm just taking that a bit further. I suppose we could also say why, you could also comment on why Holden actually bothers to tell us that, and then it's sort of disregarded. Are we going to find out about it? Is it setting up for something later? We don't know because we haven't got the rest of the text in front of us, but that is something we could talk about. So that is my little example then for what a good one looks like. So you'll notice that, where's my question? Oh, have I not put the question up? Was it right at the start? So in terms of bullet points then, I've only looked at the focus at the beginning because I've only looked at the first paragraph. So I haven't done the second paragraph, so how the writer changes focus. I haven't bothered to talk about that one because I've got plenty of information without using that. And I've talked about some other structural features. So I've done the first and the third bullet point. What is really important to mention, just like your question 2, it says you could write about. You don't have to write about all 3. So it's completely up to you. I would say do 2 of them. You don't have to do all 3. So don't feel like you have to do all of them. It's perfectly fine. And also you don't have, there isn't one which is more important to do than the others. They're all equal weighting. There isn't sort of a hierarchical system for you get more points if you talk about this. That isn't in place. So to round off then, I would like you to tell me one thing you have learned today as your little exit ticket, and I would also like you to send me questions. I will go over stop fares quickly in a couple of minutes. So whilst you're doing that, I'll just have a look through. Tilly, is there a history webinar going on today?
There's not, no. So we had our first one yesterday, I believe, which was just seeing how that one went, and we got some feedback, which was really good. So there's not one today and there's not one tomorrow. However, we'll let you know what's happening next week with history via email. And also if we can give an update in tomorrow's webinars, we will. But thanks for the question. Vicki, there was just a question about what the word postulate means.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Yeah, so postulate is, yeah, you're completely right, is another word for think about. Absolutely. I always struggle to spell most words. What can I do to improve my spelling? Right. That's a very good question and a difficult one to answer. What is the best way to do that? I'd say my advice generally for English is to read as much as you can. I wasn't a great reader at all when I was at school, and then I was sort of hitting my head against a brick wall in terms of vocabulary and being able to sort of put that into my work. I started reading a lot and my grades went up. So that's one thing you could possibly do. I'm not sure whether there is a Key Stage 3 and a Key Stage 4 spelling list. There is for Key Stage 2 and 1, but the government might provide sort of spelling lists of what they expect you to be able to spell, so maybe rattling through some of those. I'd have a look around and see what you can find on the internet. I'm not entirely sure. What might be a nice thing to do is, if you are going to read a lot, perhaps have a look at what you're reading, think, oh, I'm not sure what those words mean, or no, I don't think I could spell them. Maybe write down 5 words, have a go at repeating their spellings to get that into your head. That might be a nice way to do it. Right, so I learned how to make inferences on the focus of the paragraphs based on text given. Yeah, well, not everyone. This is the question that a lot of people struggle with, because people find structure really intimidating. And as soon as you sort of do a couple of sort of lessons focusing on what structural features actually are and what you could say about them, it is a lot more straightforward than you think. Initially, it does look very overwhelming, particularly when you've got to look at the whole text for only 8 marks. Any good books to read. Right, so what I would suggest in terms of reading, so for your English literature, there are a range of texts that your teachers have to choose from. So generally, for AQA, this is students either do Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet, Jekyll and Hyde or A Christmas Carol, and either In Spectacles or Lord of the Flies, usually. So what might be good is to have a look at the AQA specification for literature and which text you could choose from, because those would be sort of a good sort of level for you to have a crack at. So Anita and Me, that one's on the GCSE spec. So with Educast, yeah, if you're talking about books to read, you could have a look at any of the specifications. I just think that AQA is the most popular one. Have a look at any of the specifications and see what texts are on there as suggestions. Pidgin English, it's on there. What else is on AQA? Animal Farm and Lord of the Flies is on AQA. So those two would be a good place to start. What else have I got? I think those are all the 20th century ones. I might be wrong. That are actually prose. So there's some plays in there. So if you're actually looking for books, those wouldn't count. So Spectacles, A Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night, that's the play script. You could read the book. Nice book to read. I recommend that one. What else have I got around me? Any of the texts that I've been looking at with you would be a good place to start. So I looked at Catcher in the Rye, Lovely Bones. What else have I got? To Kill a Mockingbird, that is on a specification, but I can't remember which one it is. It's not AQA. Of Mice and Men, I think he's on Educast, but generally it's taught as a Key Stage 3 text. Then if you want something more challenging, which are on A-level texts, Colour Purple. What else have I got? Handmaid's Tale, that's fantastic. I really do recommend that one. Dracula, 1984. What's that one? Those are the ones I've got up that I can see that I know are actually on there. The Sign of Four is on AQA, which is not Shakespeare. Sherlock Holmes. Those are the main ones I've got around me, which are sort of that I know are on syllabuses without looking. Yeah, so the content we're looking at could absolutely be applied. Generally, you look at the same sort of things over the text, not over the text, over the syllabuses, but how they're assessed is slightly different. But the general sort of content in terms of making inferences and the terminology can be carried across. No, I don't think it's ever too early to read a book. So I think to really, really understand To Kill a Mockingbird, I think you do need to be a little bit older, because there's sort of some very adult themes in it. So it's all about sort of racism, and there's quite a big, one of the big plots is to do with rape. So that is quite a difficult topic to read about and understand. So no, I don't think it's too early, but it might be worth rereading as someone who's slightly older, just because your maturity grows. What's the best way to write a successful paragraph? So most of you taught Peel, Peter, anything along those lines. So I would just say absolutely use those structures, but make sure that you do a really thorough piece of analysis. So you do zooming in on words, or you provide alternative interpretations, or you look at more than one piece of evidence within a paragraph, just to make sure that you're showing a really wide range of thinking. How old did you have to be to read The Lovely Bones? I think it's fine for you to read at your age. I think I read it when I was 17. Egotistical means very self-centered. Everything is about you. hemorrhages is an internal bleeding that can potentially cause death. Right.
I'll just jump in quickly and answer a couple of questions about the online school. Is there biology today? Yes, there's biology at 3:15. The topic is communicable diseases, following on from non-communicable diseases yesterday. And a couple of questions about subjects that may be added. As always, we'll update you when we can. So yes, we're planning on adding some extra subjects, but we can't yet say what those will be, but we'll let you know as soon as possible. Vicki, someone's asked, is this mainly year 10 or year 11 content?
So it's all aimed at GCSE, so year 10 or year 11. I mean, it's mainly looking at sort of the end of the journey, really, because we're looking at writing in detail. We're looking at some really interesting texts, which are a little tricky. So I would say it's more geared towards year 11, but if you are year 10, it's completely applicable and it will stand you in good stead. So I really wouldn't worry if you're thinking, oh goodness, I'm year 10 and is this worth me coming? I think it still absolutely is, because it will sort of get you ahead, and particularly not being in school at the moment, it might get you really geared up and ready for when you're going into year 11. Yeah, I'd say it's aimed more towards sort of actually taking the exam in the summer. But if you are in year 10, I think it's absolutely fine for you to be here, and actually a really sensible idea, and to just sort of almost as a top up, so it isn't a real shock when you go into year 11 and school's open again. So yeah, don't feel like it's not worth coming, because I do think it really is valuable. Right. Someone asked where I got To Kill a Mockingbird, and the answer to that is probably Waterstones. I can't remember. Is this useful for year 9? Yes, so I would say if you're struggling to keep up a bit, I wouldn't worry. But I think you definitely can take things away from this, and again, it will be a good top-up tool and it will stand you in good stead. So it's a bit difficult with year 9s, because some schools start GCSE in year 9, some don't start it till year 10, but if you're currently in year 9, you will be going into year 10 anyway, so it will probably give you a head start on some of your pupils. So I think you can definitely take some valuable things away from this. Yeah, Lovely Bones in year 9. I suppose To Kill a Mockingbird is relatively similar in terms of sort of content and themes. So, and I do know schools that have taught To Kill a Mockingbird younger than that. So, would I have read it in year 9? I don't think I would have understood it. I think I would have found the themes quite difficult. I mean, I found it difficult when I was 17. So read with caution, I would say. If you're reading, think, oh, this is really a little bit bleak, because it is a very sad book, just stop reading it. I think so. Just be careful. Yeah, I'll quickly go back over. I apologise, I said I would and I haven't. So start and setting, so those two hopefully are quite obvious. Transitions, so that's moving from a person or an idea to another. Omniscient narrator, so that's a narrator that knows everything. Perspective, so is it first person, is it third person, so who is the first person and what do we know about them? So we sort of learned that they're quite in Catcher in the Rye. Holden's sort of quite egotistical, sarcastic. Third person could be over the shoulder, so like I was saying yesterday with Harry Potter, sort of we make the mistakes that Harry makes, it's all from Harry's perspective, but it's third person. Free and direct is just sort of looking down on a scene and being sort of unbiased. Yeah. Flashback and flash forward, so that's moving forwards or backwards in time for a particular reason, usually to give background information. Ending, zooming in and out, so looking at small details, looking at the bigger picture. Repetition of ideas, or words, but the words need to be repeated, you know, over paragraphs, not sort of within 2 sentences of each other. Cyclical structure, so starting and ending at the same point in a story. Pace, so how quickly or slowly it's moving. Tone, what the mood is, and I think that's all of them. If you're talking about higher and foundation in terms of English, there aren't higher and foundation English language papers or literature papers anymore. There used to be, but they were abolished a few years ago. So there won't be, because there isn't a paper for that anymore, like there is in maths. Year 9, to increase vocabulary. I tell you what, I will go away and have a think and come back to you with some of those tomorrow, because I'm just aware that we are coming to the end and we're going to have to sign off. But I will come up with some ideas for you tomorrow in terms of what would be appropriate for age groups.
Brilliant, thanks Vicki. Yeah, I think that's a good place to end. Thanks guys, lots of great questions today, and hopefully that was a really useful session for all of you, no matter what year you're in. So thank you very much Vicki for that, and we'll have our part 3 of paper 1 question 3 tomorrow at 11 AM. If you're joining us tomorrow, then we'll see you then. But if you're joining us for any further tutorials today, we have GCSE Maths coming up, Physics and Biology. So if not, have a lovely afternoon, and see you guys soon. Thank you.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.